sun.
I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Listen to Pavarotti.
Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And welcome to a special investigative Sunday night episode of The Revealing. And it is a special episode indeed, and we will be revealing things in this episode. Now, I put out a video yesterday, and some people like my humor as I do things, and sometimes I feel like it's necessary to inject humor even into a humorless subject because it's just a way of being able to take in the information without, being so mad at what you're seeing and hearing. Some people don't like it when I do that, and I understand that. But when you go through the video, if you watch the one that I put out yesterday, as I took some clips from different things and I incorporated it into a interview type informational video with a little bit of humor. One thing shouldn't be underestimated, and that is the fact that I did put all that together. I put it together rather fast for those of you that think I spent a lot of time on it, because it's not hard for me, and not because I'm great at technology or anything, just because I'm very familiar with the subject matter. But one of the things that was not edited and faked in any way, and that was the answers to the questions that you were hearing on that video. And I tried to put in very relevant things around that so that you could see firsthand what was taking place. Those answers that, for example, Jeff Nye was given, those were real answers to those questions. He literally said, if this thing went to trial, we would have learned less, not more. He literally said, listen to the prosecutors and the investigators in this case, as they clearly describe what we can and cannot prove. So as you go through and listen to that, and then the main point I was trying to make was how law enforcement, as soon as the sentencing hearing was over, before even the investigators in the case could get up there and do their song and dance, the FBI got up and applauded the use of investigative genetic genealogy in the case and pointed to it as being the saving grace of the case and a great investigative tool to be used going forward. That, after everything that we know about the IGG in this case, namely the fact that we don't even believe the IGG happened. We believe it was absolutely reverse engineered based off of people talking and other things. It was reverse engineered to match Brian Kohberger. I'll never stop believing that. I've seen too much evidence to the contrary. However, when you think about what happened in court as they litigated it, they tried to hide it throughout the entire case. Even the defense and the prosecution both filed motions in limine to exclude it from the trial. So if it is that wonderful of an investigative tool, why were they trying to hide it every step of the way? And now you're seeing the fruits of the labor as this thing progresses. But that aside, a lot of people prefer it when I do a very serious video. And for those of you that do prefer that, you're going to get that this evening. Because over the last couple of weeks, as I have gone through all the documentation in this case, I did miss a few things. I noticed Kathy in the Indie Zone pointed out one, I think it was last night, that I read it, but I overread it, and I didn't pick up exactly what it was. I didn't pick up what it was putting down, and once I seen her do it, I went, oh my goodness. So there is some serious information we're going to try to bring to you in this episode. In a case where there is literally zero answers and a million questions, we're going to do our best to try to answer some of those questions and reveal what things could really be. And we're going to do it with cold hard facts going through these documents. And I'm going to use a familiar style for some of you that have been with me for a long time. One of the things that I implore from an investigative standpoint often is the use of timelines. I believe timelines can really show you the truth as it relates to certain things. In this video, I'm going to go through some specific things in these documents and the time frame that they happened and let them paint the picture, and the picture that it's going to paint will shock you. I assure you. Also, in recent videos, I have exposed, some people don't want to believe it, but I have exposed through the documentation amongst all types of other evidence that the vehicle that surrounds the King Road neighborhood, the first three passes, 330, 337, 356, it is none other than the undercover vehicle, the Ford Fusion, the unmarked undercover college cop car that the officers were driving that evening. And the path that you see in the FBI's detailed report of that vehicle is none other than them on a patrol. Now, once again, I'll bring it up. That does not have anything to do with the vehicle that pulls into the neighborhood at 404, goes to Linda Lane, turns around at 405, goes to King and Queen, makes a 3-point turn, goes back to the Linda Lane camera at past 407 and likely doesn't park till well past 408. It doesn't include that vehicle, but it does absolutely prove that the first three passes were not it certainly wasn't a Hyundai Elantra, and it certainly wasn't Brian Kohberger's car. And some people just don't want to believe that, even though I've proven it with the court doc, went through it in detail, backed it up with the statement from the DoorDash driver, seeing the officers pull through at the exact same time, corroborated it with the officers seeing the DoorDash driver at the same time, and so forth and so on. Some of the things that I'm going to disclose in this video is going to prove that even further with court docs, literally. It's also going to expose something else, though, that I think is very, very interesting in this case. And that's going to be the focus of the video. I'm not going to get into it right now. I'm going to expose it as I go along. But then there's one other thing. There's one other thing. Now, over the last couple of weeks, I keep getting these questions in my comments. Why would Brian Kohberger take the plea deal? And I have given example after example after example, video after video after video of reasons why Brian Kohberger would have taken that plea deal. Not just one reason. There's no one thing. I've given literally many different plausible reasons why Kohberger would have taken the plea deal. From the massive onslaught of 2.5 years worth of mainstream media putting out literal documentaries, interviews on a daily basis, and focusing in on actual lies in the case. Now, the prosecutor, this is what people don't really get, is all of those lies, such as that Kohberger was following the victims online. He was liking Maddie's pictures on Instagram. Those were all lies. The prosecution and the law enforcement have come out and said unequivocally, no, those are lies. That didn't happen. The fact that there's no evidence he ever even went to the Mad Greek. The law enforcement, prosecution came out and said that's a lie. It never happened. Almost the entire Dateline. One of the things that Dateline focused on in their expose that supposedly leaked all the information, one of the things they focused on was Kohberger's selfies and the fact that Kohberger was trying to take selfies looking like Ted Bundy and that Kohberger was a budding Ted Bundy. Bill Thompson himself, in an article, in an interview, said that those pictures of Kohberger were one of hundreds of selfies of such. And his searches of Ted Bundy and any other type of criminal were just as likely to be searches that a student in his area of studies would make as it would be anything else. So it's all been nothing but lie after lie. Papa Rogers, people still are trying to... I showed a video where Papa Rogers was commenting on school budgets in Indiana. They're still trying to say Papa Rogers was somehow Brian Koberger, as if the FBI couldn't track down who a profile online was. Come on. And the prosecution and the investigators said that we've looked into it. He's not Papa Rogers. They still continue to do that. But then when you look at all of the things that Dateline put out, one of the things that the Dateline show put out, let me just point out a few of their lies that Bill Thompson and the investigators have gone through and negated now. One of their lies was that Brian Koberger, prior to the atrocity on King Road, stopped using his debit card. They literally said this in the Dateline episode. It was one of their big reveals, that he stopped using his debit card just before the atrocity, and he only used cash to make purchases from that point until almost the time that he was arrested. When you go through these court documents, you'll see that Brian Koberger, after the atrocity, made like 20 purchases at different times at Target in Moscow. They said that Koberger had never, this is from the beginning, they said Koberger never went to Moscow, Idaho after the unalivings, right? We've heard that this entire time. Koberger went to Target in Moscow 15 times after the unalivings. Walmart. People still talk about the Dickies thing. There is nothing in any documents that shows Koberger purchased any kind of Dickies anything. All of this stuff you've been hearing for years, it turns out it's all lies. And then they were going to have the Amazon Prime, the new Patterson book that people actually, one of my commenters said, you can call and get your money back on the Patterson book. It was so full of lies, and they'll give you money right back instantly. The Amazon Prime series, full of lies. It was just taken from the Patterson book. All that was coming out right before the trial. So when you think about not only all the media, brainwashing of the public, but the fact that they were brainwashing the public on things that were not true, that would make somebody think twice about going in front of a jury with a death penalty qualified jury in their case, I assure you. Not only that, we've also discussed how the prosecution was talking about bringing Koberger's parents in and how that may have played a role in it, and many other things. But in this video, I'm going to give you what I believe was the final whack to the tree. And, I've given you the example before of, if you think about somebody chopping down a tree with a hatchet, right? You don't just hit the tree with the hatchet one time and it fall over. You hit the tree with the hatchet 15, 20 times until it's finally weak enough, and you hit it with that last blow, then all of a sudden the tree starts to tip and it falls. I believe that is what we're looking at and why Brian Koberger took the plea deal. It wasn't any one thing. It was a myriad of different things that made him go right before trial, wow, there's no way I can win this thing because of all these external things. And there's reasons why I shouldn't go through with it because of these external things. I mean, obviously, the defense said they didn't have enough time to even prepare the case. They couldn't get a continuance. They put forward an alternate perpetrator theory so that they could present at trial certain evidence that would negate guilt. All those things were overruled. So there's many whacks to that tree, but in this episode, I'm going to show you what I believe was that final whack that made that tree start to tilt and fall over. And I'm going to point out some other things that will blow your mind. So in this episode, folks, be prepared because we are going to pick fly shit out of black pepper. And what we pick out of that black pepper is going to knock your socks off. So hold on tight to your seat, put your seatbelt on, because we're about to hit this roller coaster ride, and there is many loops in this one. Let's go. "4 a.m. seems to be the dark hour in this story, not 2 a.m. And from the beginning, the PCA told us the crime started at 4 a.m. In the 911 call, Dylan Mortensen stated at 4 a.m. she had heard things upstairs in the house. In statements now that we get to read In the Moscow PD release, many statements show Dylan saying this started at 4 a.m. Bethany makes statements that this started at 4 a.m. Hunter Johnson, Emily Allant make statements that Dylan and Bethany told them that this started at 4 a.m. That means 4 a.m. is a critical time in this investigation to when the atrocity started. Brian Koberger, if it even could be his car, wouldn't have been able to park 1 second before 4:08. So what is going on at 4 a.m. and what do we know happened at 4 a.m.? The only thing that we know that happened at 4 a.m. beyond a shadow of a doubt is that is when the DoorDash delivery was made to the King Road residence. Let's go to the docs. Now, we've already covered in detail that on November 12th, the detail of Rosendahl and Tisdale started. They circled the King Road neighborhood, just like described as suspect vehicle 1, several passes. And on one of those passes, the last one, in fact, they see a dark colored vehicle with the taillights on behind the King Road residence as they drive by. They saw several individuals approaching the King Road residence as they drive by. As we have put it together, this would have been right before 4 a.m. Then we go to the DoorDash's statement. And she specifically says in her statement, as she parks behind the King Road residence, verifying that was the car with the taillights on that the officer saw, that McMichael saw a tan sedan drive by them while she was walking. It was a male driver with blonde or red spiky hair. She literally testifies to seeing the undercover officer's vehicle right at the time you would expect to see their vehicle. Once we put all that together, then we must go to the investigation of this case based on Moscow PD's records. And we know through the court record that the first investigative tool used in this case was by the FBI, and it was the tower dump for cell phones in a radius around the King Road neighborhood. They captured any phone that was available in this area to start the investigation. Now, we know at 4 a.m., the critical time, the DoorDash delivery was made at 1122 King Road. We know now, verified through the court documents, that the DoorDash driver had to be found during the investigation. She did not come forward, and she was not identified, now we know, until November 22nd, 2022, 9 days after the atrocity started. But how did this come about? The second investigative tool used by the FBI in the investigation was a tightening of the area of the tower dump. And they did that by use of a Google geofence warrant, tightening the area of who was active in the area during the time of the atrocity. Now, we start this on November 13th, 2022 at the atrocity, followed by the tower dump on the 15th. Then the geofence warrant was issued on November 18th, 2022. And what were they looking for? Now, when we go to the document, number 57, written by Lawrence Mowry on December 5th, but he's referring to what he did on November 18th, 2022. And this is for the Google geofence warrant. And it says he applied and was granted a geofence warrant for any data associated with anonymized information located within the following latitude, longitude points. And then it gives the 4 points of latitude and longitude around the King Road residence. Special Agent Nick Balance with the Federal Bureau of Investigations assisted in the production and service of the warrant. On November 18, 2022, at approximately 2330 hours, The warrant was served by email at google.com and it's blocked out. That's an administrative email. Then on November 20th, 2022, Special Agent Balance received the data requested pursuant to the warrant that was available. The data files were downloaded to the forensic computers located at the Secure Forensic Computer Lab at the MPD. Now, based on the information received and in correlation with cell tower records previously reviewed, so they took the cell tower records that were previously reviewed and then they correlated it to what they got back from the geofence warrant. And by putting those two things together, two of the anonymous identifiers were found to be of interest. Found to be of interest. So after all that work, it nailed them down to two people. And those two people were, number one, Molly McMichael. And number two is, we can only assume to be an unknown occupant who was with Molly McMichael. That is a speculation. But on November 20th, 2022, I applied and was granted a warrant for any data associated with the previous identifiers, including subscriber information. Special Agent Nick Balance with the Federal Bureau of Investigations assisted in the production and service of the warrant. On November 20th, 2022, at approximately 2214 hours, the warrant was served on email, and then they list an email address. On November 20th, 2022, Special Agent Balance received notice the data requested pursuant to the warrant was available. The data files were downloaded to the MPD forensic computer, and it was found one of the identifiers came back to the phone number of McMichael. I completed the warrant and turned it in. But we've got to take notice of these dates and what their investigation was telling them. If they already had a DoorDash bag and they assumed a DoorDash delivery was made and it was not nefarious, well, then they would have went a different direction. But how did they find the DoorDash driver? By taking their geofence warrant and taking the information in it, cross-referencing it with the tower dump, and it provided them with two people, Molly McMichael and I believe an unknown occupant of her vehicle. Then they took those two identifiers, got another warrant, and wanted more information about them. They got it back on November 20th. And then they served a warrant on their email. And the data requested pursuant to the warrant was made available to them on November 20th. Now, you may say you don't know for sure that that's Molly McMichael, Pavarotti, but the timeline gives us the answers to these questions. So following the investigation timeline, 11:13 atrocity, 11:15 tower dump, 11:18 now. I've given you proof of the geofence warrant. They said they cross-referenced the two and it provided them with two users. One of them would be Molly McMichael. That warrant returned on November the 20th, 2022 for her email. Now, how do you know you're right about what you're saying, Pav? Because you follow it right to this document. And this was written also by Detective Lawrence Mowry on December 6th, but he's referring to what happened on November 22nd, 2022, just 2 days after they got the email address and the warrant back for that email address. And on November 22nd, 2022, I applied for and was granted a PIN warrant. Now, we all know what this means. This is a PIN trap and trace, so that they can look at all the numbers that are being dialed and coming in, and they know exactly where this phone location is on this device. For any data associated with the phone number, and then they black it out, which was linked to a possible witness. Now, who do we know to be the only two possible witnesses in this case? Dylan Mortensen and Molly McMichael. And there can be no doubt that they're referring to Molly McMichael when you see the initials and the size of the word and everything else that goes with it. So, anything which was linked to a possible witness, Molly McMichael. Now, did they know at this point that she was a witness or a suspect? Considering the methods they're using to locate this person, you can bet they had no idea. Special Agent Nick Balance with the Federal Bureau of Investigations assisted in the production and service of the warrant. On November 22nd, 2022, at approximately 2026 hours, the warrant was served via fax and email to wherever they served the warrant to. Then on November 22nd, 2022, Special Agent Balance received notice the data requested pursuant to the warrant was available. The data files were downloaded to the forensic computers located in the Secure Forensic Computer Lab at the Moscow PD. The pen register trap and trace data were terminated on November 30th, 2022. I wonder why they terminated that. I have an idea. McMichael was subsequently identified, located, and interviewed as a witness by Corporal Brett Payne. I completed the warrant receipt and affidavit, so on and so forth. So, what does that tell us about the investigation so far? Tells us the atrocity happened on November 13th, tower dump on the 15th, geofence warrant on the 18th. They cross-reference the two, it gives them Molly McMichael. On the 20th, a warrant comes back from her email, and then on the 22nd, they get a warrant for a trap and trace pen register on Molly's phone. Then what happens next? Well, that just happens to be where this warrant starts that we've gone over in detail by Brett Payne. What does he say on November 23rd, 2022? Following right along the investigation timeline, that's when they bring in Molly McMichael to get her statement. Now, it turns out Brett Payne is not as dense as I thought he might have been, because I don't believe it took him too long once Molly McMichael talked about the vehicle that she seen, the tan sedan that drove next to her while she was walking. It doesn't look to me like it took too long for Brett Payne to realize that Molly McMichael is actually seeing the undercover police car, and that is actually the vehicle that they see in their video at this point. And we know this to be the case because of the actions that Brett Payne takes after this. But first, let's add it to our timeline. So once again, we got the atrocity on the 13th, followed by the tower dump. Then the geofence warrant, they cross-reference them. It gives them Molly McMichael's email. They get a warrant for her email. Then that gives them her phone number. They get a warrant for the trap and trace on her phone number. 13th, 15th, 18th, 20th, 22nd. Now we know that on the 23rd, they bring in Molly for her first interview. You see how this works, folks? Right on the money. So what happens next? Well, Brett Payne does exactly what I would expect him to do. He says that the very next day, November 24th, 2022, at approximately 1700 hours on November 24th, 2022, I took the MPD school car. In case you have any questions about what the MPD school car is, a silver Ford Fusion. Now, why is Brett Payne taking this MPD school car and doing these tests with it? It's quite obvious because of Molly McMichael's statement of her seeing the MPD school car driving past her at right before 4 a.m. And he drove the route of the suspect vehicle. Now, why would you take the MPD school car and drive the route of the suspect vehicle there, Brett Payne? I drove two separate routes in front of the camera located at Ridge Road. I can't remember the address on it, but we all know it. Once westbound on Louder Avenue and then twice on Ridge Road, southbound and northbound. Now, why was he doing this? I advised the command post of the times these runs and requested the video from the point of contact at Ridge Road in order to compare the color of the test vehicle to that of the suspect vehicle. So what he is describing here is when you have the King Road residence here and it goes over to King and it comes out to Taylor. We all are familiar with this loop, how Taylor goes down, you turn on Ridge, come down here to Paradise, back up where Louder comes through and meets Ridge, and then it goes up over to Taylor. So what Brett Payne is describing here is first, he drove two routes in front of the camera. The first one was westbound on Louder. All right, so westbound on Louder means he was driving this way on Louder because I believe it's 1125 Ridge Road right here, caught a vehicle on camera. So he was driving that same route so he could compare that Ford Fusion to that camera footage. But then he drove this way and this way on Ridge Road so he could compare that camera footage on Ridge to that Ford Fusion. Why was he doing that? Because of the video footage of the vehicle on Ridge. Now, I bet he was surprised when it didn't match up to that video because we now know that that video was of the green Hyundai Elantra, not that Ford Fusion. So he, I'm sure, was able to rule the vehicle out for that one. However, you can also see that he was trying to determine if it was the Ford Fusion that Molly McMichael had seen. And we know that because he says, once I completed these runs, I drove to 1122 King Road and walked the route Molly McMichael stated she took while on foot near the house on 11/13/2022. So they are deeply investigating Molly McMichael at this point, and you would assume that you would because she's the only person that you know was there at 4 a.m. where everybody says this crime started. Now, also, he parked the MPD school car on Queen Road immediately to the east of 1122 King Road. So what is he saying right there? Here is 1122 King Road. Here's the Queen Road Apartments. He's saying that he parked that vehicle directly to the east. Where are we at? Directly to the east of 1122 King Road. So that means he parked that vehicle right here. Could possibly mean he parked the vehicle right here, directly to the east. He isn't more specific. But he is saying that in order to observe the effects of the orange tinted street lights located in that area, to observe the effects of what? He wants to see what the orange tinted street lights, what the effect it has on the Ford Fusion, the MPD school car, because he wants to see if it makes it look like a tan sedan and verify the DoorDash statement that that is what she had seen. And guess what? It turned out the lights appeared to make the silver vehicle look tanner in color than it would under the white street lights. This is how an investigation is supposed to go. What are they doing? They just interviewed Molly McMichael and they got her statement. He knows that that vehicle was the Ford Fusion, y'all. He knows it was. That's why he brought it in to make sure that it looked like it was tan under those street lights, because he was trying to confirm that Molly McMichael was telling the truth. But that means that they knew that that Ford Fusion was the car that was driving around the neighborhood at 3:56, 3:30, and 3:37. They're simply verifying the DoorDash's statement to see if she's telling the truth. Now, why would they take the Ford Fusion that she said she had seen at 3:56 and put it under street lights to make sure that it appeared tan the day after they're actually having the statements given by Molly McMichael after they went through all that trouble to find out who Molly McMichael was and what she was doing there? That tells you that they knew it the entire time. And it also tells you that Molly McMichael's statement was true. That was that vehicle. Now, right here, it takes a left turn because he goes off into this glove thing that I don't believe even has any relevance to the case. And I would explain in more depth because there's more docs about it, but I'm focused on what I'm focused on now, because this tells me right here, because they were trying to verify if Molly McMichael was telling the truth by putting that Ford Fusion underneath that light to make it tan, it tells me they knew from 11/24 of 2022 that that was not Brian Koberger's car making the first 3 loops. They knew it was the Ford Fusion, but the trickery doesn't stop there. So again, atrocity on the 13th, tower dump 15th, geofence warrant 18th. They cross-reference them. It gives them Molly McMichael. On the 20th, they get a warrant for her email. It gives them her phone number. On the 22nd, they get a warrant for a trap and trace on her phone number. On the 23rd, they bring her in for an interview. Her statement says that she had seen a vehicle that was tan right as she was walking to the house at 3:57 a.m. And what do? The very next day, Payne takes the same vehicle that she's describing, the undercover car, puts it underneath the lights at Linda Lane to verify that she's telling the truth. And based on that, he assumes she's telling the truth on everything. But she was absolutely telling the truth on that. You see how this works, folks? And Payne knew that was the car right there, and I just proved it. Now, they must have felt a little better about her since they verified her statement, but they weren't off of her as a suspect entirely, because Lawrence Mowry, we know on December 6th, applied for and was granted a warrant for all the information in DoorDash's possession related to the sales, deliveries, purchases, and/or transaction made to 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, for a period of January 1st through present. Not just that evening. December 6, 2022, the warrant was served via email. They got it back on December 7th. And the files were downloaded, and it never tells us what was in these files, which is very interesting. But I have a feeling what happened after this, because at this point, we're going to fast forward all the way into the future, into the defense of Brian Koberger. You see, the Koberger defense team smelled this all out, and they were preparing their defense. You can see on March 22nd, 2024, the defense counsel asked for a supplemental request for discovery, and this was number 12. And you can see what their supplemental request for discovery was. And it was on Tuesday, March 19th, 2024, I received an email from Captain Blaker containing 2 attachments. The first attachment was titled Vehicle List. This document contained all information on MPD's fleet of vehicles, to include non-patrol and unmarked vehicles. The second attachment, MPD schedule for 11/12 to 11/13. The defense was all over it, y'all. They knew it was Tisdale and Rosendahl driving around. They knew it was their silver car. They knew it was the unmarked car. And you can bet at this point, because we never heard Molly McMichael's name in this case, the prosecution was keeping her under wraps, and so was the defense. Why? You read her statement. The defense was going to use Molly McMichael to testify that that unmarked vehicle that she had seen that evening was the unmarked vehicle. She was going to use her testimony to get her to testify to that. That's why she wanted the schedule and the unmarked vehicles in that supplemental request for discovery. And you can bet this entire time that was a major part of the defense's strategy on that car, was to prove that it was Tisdale and Rosendahl, and they were going to do it through the testimony of Molly McMichael because of her statements in the beginning. And here's what happened when Ann Taylor got up in court and said these words. That means that car driving around you see on cameras, it's either white or silver. Remember when she said that in the Franks hearing? That let the prosecution and the people in the know that Ann Taylor knew what vehicle that was. So it had to be shocking what happened next for Ann Taylor and Brian Kohberger. But first, let's go to the timeline. Once again, atrocity, tower dump, geofence, cross-reference to 2. It gives you McMichael's email. They get a warrant for an email. It gives her phone number. They get a warrant for a trap and trace. They bring her in for an interview. They take her statement. The next day, Payne does what an investigator does and tries to corroborate or make her statement false. Well, he was able to corroborate it with tests he had done from the car. Then we have the DoorDash warrant, followed by the next year, the defense smelling out the game. The DoorDash warrant on December 6th was issued. Then in discovery, Ann Taylor asked for the list of undercover cars and the schedule in the same discovery request of the officers that evening. Now imagine you're the Kohberger defense team. You're getting hammered with social media. You know more social media is coming out that's going to push more lies. You have a plan for trial to use the DoorDash driver to corroborate that it's not Brian Kohberger's car. It is, in fact, the officer's car at trial. And then out of nowhere, right before all of your motions are denied, you see this come out on the news, and your star witness that's going to help you corroborate your information all of a sudden says that she's going to be testifying to this.
We know about some of the witnesses. One of those witnesses we believe is going to be the DoorDash driver who made a delivery. And now, all of a sudden, we are hearing about and from that DoorDash driver in the form of a body cam video. Take a look.
You what?
I'm supposed to testify against Brian next year.
Brian?
Yep, I killed all the girls over in Moscow.
Well, this won't change any of that.
Yeah, well, there's a DUI on my record.
I think they would be more concerned about the drug use than the DUI.
And then now I have to testify. Big murder case here, so yeah, because I'm a DoorDash driver, so yeah.
You have to testify in which murder case?
Murder case with the college girl.
Oh.
My DoorDash driver, I saw Brian.
So you hear what she is saying, both in the back of the cruiser and when she gets back to the station.
So now we know that on June 13th, 2025, somebody leaked the DoorDash body-worn camera of the DoorDash driver to the public. And imagine the thoughts of Ann Taylor and Brian Kohberger at this point, because originally they believed she was going to testify to her statements that she had made to law enforcement in the beginning and corroborate their entire case. But instead, now she learns what she's actually going to be testifying to, which they know is a lie based on her original statements. But then again, Ann Taylor has known Bill Thompson for a long time, even before the Meister case where he pulled the same things. So I'm sure she was very aware, due to her previous relationship with Thompson, what he was capable of, and seeing what the DoorDash driver said she was going to testify to would have been the last axe hatchet in the tree that made the tree turn over and forced Brian Kohberger into a plea deal. And it's that special date, for the next doc that gets me every time. Remember this date I told you about? 6/26/25? This was the date that Brian Kohberger's motion to compel and alternative perpetrator proffer was both denied by Judge Hippler. It's also the date that Skylar Mead's case went into some type of hiatus and they changed his indictment. It's also the date they changed the indictment on Umfenauer, and now I know they changed Umfenauer's indictment to actually seeking the death penalty, unlike Mead. It's also the date that Tyson Farley got a Rule 11 plea agreement, and he will not be incarcerated this time. He will get probation again. It's also a very important date in the Burroughs case, among others. But now when I apply that date to Molly here, it really makes me wonder. You can see this is Danny Vargas on July 9th, 2025, right? This is after the plea agreement for Kohberger. But we know that plea agreement was made before June 26th, and we've already been through why that is. But you can see on June 26th, I reached out to Pullman PD records technician and requested any reports, charging documents, and all recordings involving Molly McMichael from June 1st, 2022 to May 31st, 2025. I informed R I had located the following reports involving Molly in Spillman related to PPD, Pullman Police Department. R responded and provided me with a link to GovQA, where I downloaded all the reports, body cam video, and other recordings provided. I reviewed the body camera footage from wherever he reviewed it from. In the following video, Axon Flex 2, 9/4/2024, 2050 MP4 at approximately 8:30 minutes into the video, Molly talks about having to testify in the upcoming unaliving trial involving the 4 college girls because she is the DoorDash driver. Molly's voice is muffled, but it sounds like she says, "I saw Brian there parked right next to him." On June 26, 2025, I contacted MPD Property Records Coordinator and requested any reports, charging documents, and all recordings involving Molly McMichael. Through May 31st of 2025, I informed them that I had located the following reports involving Molly in Spillman-related MPD. On June 26th, I contacted Whitman County records technician and requested any reports, charging documents, and all recordings involving Molly McMichael from June 1st through May 31st, 2025. June 1st, 2022 to May 31st, 2025. I informed Molly I had located the following reports. I informed somebody. I located the following reports involving the Spillman. And we responded, and he provided me with a copy of the 4 reports. No recordings were provided for the report. Then he talks about downloading everything. And in case you have any questions, it says right here, M. McMichaels. So why were they doing all of this work on June 26, 2025, when I just showed you that body cam footage was leaked on June 13th? You really think it took them that much time just to start looking into Molly? They knew this case was over on the 26th, and this was their cleanup for Molly. So let me see if I can wrap this in a bow. When you look at everything that I just showed you, I think the end result is, well, I mean, it just tells itself out. The 4 a.m. start time of the atrocity, that all the witnesses involved say it started at 4 a.m. And then you look at the only person that was at the residence undeniably at 4 a.m. that wasn't one of the victims or the roommates. Well, that tells us that, and you look at how the investigators investigated the case, they had to find the DoorDash driver through tower dumps, geofence warrants, warrants for her email, then warrants for a trap and trace for her phone before they ever got her in for an interview. She wasn't running in to tell what she knew. That either makes her highly suspect or at the very least makes her very knowledgeable about who is highly suspect. Either way, she would do anything in her power for the MPD not to have to go any further in the case. So, and we know she's friends with Bill Thompson. However, when you look on the backside, why would they kowtow to Molly McMichael and collude? Well, you see now that she was the one person who could literally blow the lid off the fact that the vehicles driving around the King Road neighborhood was none other than Tisdale and Rosendahl doing their narcotics alcohol patrol until old Bob figured out where the discrepancy was in the body cam footage. Now it's known to everybody. People want to deny it. You can't deny the truth, and the truth will prevail. All the darkness will be brought to light. But to wrap it in a bow, so if the defense team, who was getting battered left and right going into this trial, all of a sudden their entire strategy at trial with the DoorDash driver, based on her original statement, was to put her on the stand and destroy the state's case and let the state know that was the undercover cop car, because they didn't know the body cam footage had been changed, I guarantee it. And then they look on the internet and somehow it's been magically leaked and somebody knows to put that footage out of Molly changing her statement and saying, I'm going to testify against Brian. I saw him there and I parked next to him. What do you think the defense team did? I'm sure they sank to their lowest level. Ann Taylor knew what Bill Thompson was capable of. And I think that was the final blow that sent Brian Kohberger into that plea agreement. People need to know the truth. And Brian needs to know the truth that we're out here fighting for the truth, because the timetable is running out on filing that appeal, but we still got plenty of time. We still got a month. So I'm going to wrap it up right there, folks. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, your thoughts, your criticisms. I'm going to keep bringing what's dark to light. Can't stop the truth. Pavarotti's out.
Oh, gonna give it a shot. Only one of me to shield you all from the